Hi, I want to return to the theme of Anselm on freedom of the will, thinking about the role of our own free choice as opposed to God's grace. There is something here that I think is very important that we haven't yet talked about. There's a criticism of Augustine, and it's a central point in Augustine, I think, in his understanding of weakness of the will. It really points out the way in which Anselm's account differs from Augustine's account. So it's an important point, and it also leads Anselm to one of his most dramatic conclusions, which is that we cannot lose the rectitude of the will willingly. The will can be enslaved only by itself, only with its own consent. We cannot be enslaved by an outside force. We cannot be conquered by an outside force. It may feel that way. Paul may say, this sin feels like something outside me. It is not I who sin, but the sin that dwells within me. But really, when we carefully analyze that, we realize that my will is in effect conquering itself. It cannot be conquered by anything else. It can't even be conquered by God. It can be conquered only with its own consent. Let's start with the analogy that I mentioned last time. You're in a dark mansion. There are some lamps and some matches for lighting the lamps, but it's completely dark. You can't find your way out, and you can't find any of the lamps and any of the matches. Well, you need help. You can't do it on your own. You could go and find them if you knew which way to look, but you can't find anything because it's so dark. That's our situation. Once we've lost rectitude of the will, through original sin, for example, or through our own corruption, we are now in a position where we have voluntarily become slaves to sin. We can't earn our way out of that slavery. We can't get out of it except through some outside agency. And so to go back to the mansion analogy, God has to not only provide the lamps and the matches, but also has to find them and light them for us, has to hand us the lit lamp. Once that happens, then we can proceed. But even if he hands us the lamps, even if we get a lamp and some matches, we can't see to light it. We don't know how to do it. And so it requires God's action, God's grace, to hand us that lamp, to restore the rectitude of the will, in other words, and to free us. But here's the point. We have to then act to preserve it. That grace is not irresistible. It's not as if now, no problem, we find our way out of the mansion. We have to preserve that flame, and we have to choose to preserve it. We have the power to do it internally. We haven't lost that. But on the other hand, we have to make the free choice to do it. And it's a question of preserving it, maintaining it, keeping it. It's not a one-time thing. Ah, yes, I accept the gift of grace. It's not like that. No, we have to work at it. We have to preserve it. And that's something we can easily be led astray from. We have a desire for happiness that is going to be like a draft pushing us and leading that flame to go out. We've got to protect it. We, moreover, can maybe enjoy the dark. And so we might blow the lamp out ourselves. All of those things are the things that might happen. Now, at this point, Anselm's student says, well, wait, okay, it's our free choice. But I don't understand. Why is it that some people make that choice, choose to preserve the rectitude of the will that God, through an act of grace, has restored to them, and that other people don't? Why is it that other people then allow the lamp to go out, allow that rectitude to go away, to fail to preserve it, to in effect put themselves back into slavery? Now notice where this is going. The thought would be, look, if it's through their own free choice, then don't I need another account of that kind of freedom? And if it's a question of necessity of some kind, then we're back in the same problem and they can't be blamed for allowing the flame to go out. It looks like we're now back in the position of Adam and Eve themselves, back in the position before the fall, but now we face that old problem. Are we sitting then freely or by necessity? How do we understand that kind of choice? So some people preserve the light of the lamp. Others don't. Why do they make the choice? They make the choice freely, Anselm says. It's not by necessity. You can't pass the buck off onto God or someone else. No, it is fully their responsibility. They make that choice. They make the choice to sell themselves back into slavery or to resist that and maintain their freedom. Once grace has been granted to us, the rectitude of the will has been restored. We now have a desire to do the right thing because it's right, to have that rectitude of the will. We have a desire for justice. But of course, Adam and Eve had a desire for justice, and they got rid of it. They ended up destroying it. They didn't maintain it. what's the difference? And how do we do it? Now, God wills us to maintain it. After all, the rectitude of the will is a matter of willing to will what God wills us to will. And of course God wills that we will what God wills us to will. It would be absurd to say that God wills us not to will what God wills us to will. So I realize that goes by fast and it sounds confusing, but he thinks it's absolutely axiomatic. Of course God wills our freedom and wills that we preserve the rectitude of the will. So God wants us to be saved. God wants us to do the right thing for the right reason, to will to do the right thing for the right reason, and to preserve that ability. So, yes, God wills our freedom. On the other hand, we don't always act as God wills. We don't always have our will conforming to the will of God. And therein lies a problem. Is there any possibility of an external force overcoming us? No. Only we can do that. We cannot lose rectitude except by our own will. Now, I have to contrast this with the view in Augustine. Augustine rejects the Socratic picture that weakness of will is due to ignorance. He rejects the Platonic picture that it's a question of desire and or emotion overcoming reason. And he ends up concluding that it's a different kind of analysis that's required. In fact, the soul is unified. There is one soul in me, one will. But on the other hand, I can will to will what I will. I can also not will to will what I will. In other words, I can will willingly, where I will this and I will to will it. And in other cases, I can will unwillingly. I can will something, but I don't will to will it. Maybe I even will not to will it, or will the opposite. So here's an example. I face temptation. I don't want to give in to temptation. In the end, I do give in to it. I will to give in to temptation. But on the other hand, I don't will to give in to temptation. I want that piece of chocolate cake. I don't want it, but I do want it, and I give in to that first order desire, the desire for the cake. And it wins out over my second order desire, my desire not to have the desire to have that cake. That in general happens in cases of moral conflict where I have to make a choice between two things. Let's say, in the case that Anselm has in mind, following Augustine, I have to tell a lie in order to save my own life. I either have to die or I have to lie. Now I'm deliberating about what to do. And let's say I choose, for the sake of preserving my own life, to tell a lie. Well, I'm choosing that willingly, so I am making the choice. I am willing to lie. But on the other hand, I don't will to lie, he says. I really do not choose to face that choice. I'm doing it under compulsion. I will, but unwillingly. I will it, but I don't will to will it, just like wanting the cake, but not wanting to want the cake. Here I will to lie, but I don't will to lie. I choose to tell the lie, but I don't want to choose it. I'm choosing it because I'm forced to. And so he says there are times when I will unwillingly, meaning that I act on the basis of one of these first order desires that I do not endorse at the higher level. I don't will to have that will. And so I act on the basis of a willing. It is true, I choose that thing, but on the other hand, I don't will to will it. Maybe I even will the opposite. I will that P, for example, but I do not will to will that P. I will P unwillingly. Now, Anselm thinks this is absurd. He says, whenever I will something, I will willingly. Whenever I choose it, I choose to choose it. And so I can't get out of this in the way that Augustine does. There's no such thing as willing unwillingly. I will things willingly. Okay? Now here is the idea, is to put it symbolically. If I will that P, I will that P. I choose P, well, that means I chose to choose P. There is none of this, well, I chose it, but I didn't choose to choose it. No, you chose it, and you chose to choose it. So Anselm says, I cannot will unwillingly. My will cannot go against itself. I can't will and yet not will to will that thing. There's some kind of contradiction here. The will here is not just a matter of wanting something. For him, the exercise of the will involves choosing. And so it would be like saying, I choose this, but I don't choose to choose it. He says that's absurd. If I will this, I will to will it. If I choose it, I choose to choose it. There is no way of saying, well, I choose this, but not really, I don't want to. No, you have to make a choice. So here's this picture. Faced with moral conflict, faced with temptation, I am in a position where I have to make a choice. And in that moment of decision, I have to face that, and I have to take full responsibility for my choice. Now, I may be in a situation facing a conflict that I would not choose. So fair enough to say, I wish I weren't in this position where I have to either tell a lie or sacrifice my own life. I don't want to have to make this choice. But now that I'm here, I have to make a choice. And I have to choose. I not only have to choose, I have to choose it. I can't say, well, I choose it, but I don't choose to choose it. No, I will it, and I will it willingly. I have a moment of choice, a moment of freedom. I have to go this way or that. And no matter how much I regret being at that crossroads, I have to commit to one way or the other. I am in one of those decisive moments where I have to go this way or have to go that way. It does not get me off the hook to say I go this way but against my own will. You cannot will against your own will. You will willingly whenever you will. So, if faced with that threat to your life, you will to tell the lie, you do that willingly. You make that choice. You choose to choose it. Now, you didn't choose that situation. You didn't choose to be at that crossroads where you had to go this way or that way. But you were at the crossroads, and so you went that way. You have to take full responsibility. The fact that as you do it, you feel bad about it doesn't make it okay. You still bear full responsibility. We see here, I think, a prefiguring of Kant's idea that he who wills the ends wills the means, by which he means wills the necessary means. After all, what you're doing here is thinking, I want to save my life. Telling a lie is a necessary condition in this case, a necessary means to saving my life. So I will to save my life. That means, Anselm and Kant would say, I am willing the lie. I can't say, well, not really. I want to save my life. I don't really will to lie. I mean, I'm making this choice, but under duress. It's not really an act of freedom. It's not really a choice of mine. Yes, it is, Anselm says. And yes, Kant says, it is. If you will that end, then you will that means in choosing that means to that end. Sorry. Doesn't matter if it's the only available means. You could always reject the end. You don't have to pick that means. And so this is not a case where you're truly forced. You are still making a choice. You could choose to die and tell the truth. Now that might be a brutal thing, very difficult. But nevertheless, it's available to you. You could do it. And so you act freely in that sense. You are exercising freedom of the will, even if the gun is to your head. This also prefigures Jean-Paul Sartre's idea of our absolute freedom. He envisions moments like that, moments when we have that freedom to choose, and we cannot say, but I didn't make this situation. Sorry, he says, look, even if you're there in wartime, there's a sense in which you chose it. You could opt out. You always have another choice. And so there's a sense in which you are responsible for everything you do. You cannot say, well, I did it, under those circumstances. You can't blame me. It was the circumstances. No, it is something that is fully your responsibility. It would be bad faith in Sartrean terms to say, I will it, but only unwillingly. No, you have to accept full responsibility. When you will willingly. You make that choice, a choice out of absolute freedom of the will. And that becomes something for which you can be praised, but also blamed. So let's go back to Anselm. Anselm's point is that the will cannot be conquered except by itself. It can only be conquered with its own consent. So in short, I can be led astray. I can give up the rectitude of my own will. I have that ability, and I can do that freely. Moreover, when I do it, no matter what the circumstances, I am freely choosing to do it. I am willing to do it, and willing it willingly. So I cannot say, well, I'm giving up rectitude, but something else is making me do it. I can't say, I'm doing it, but unwillingly. No, if I make that choice, I am choosing to surrender my own rectitude. So I bear full responsibility. I am responsible for my slavery to sin. I am responsible for the things I do as a slave to sin, because I am the one who freely chose that. I did it willingly, not unwillingly. I faced that moment of absolute choice, and I gave up my own rectitude. I bear full responsibility for that. So here's the picture. When we give in to temptation, we aren't being overcome by something outside of us, nor are we allowing a will to take precedence that we act on unwillingly. No, we don't will unwillingly. We don't get knocked over by some outside force and not will at all. We will, and we will willingly. We are conquered by sin, but with our own consent. We consent to becoming a slave. Let's go back to my analogy about the mansion. We have the flame reignited for us, lit for us by the grace of God. But it's up to us to maintain it, and we can choose not to do it. We can even choose to blow it out. And indeed, some people do make that choice. But no matter what the situation they're facing is, it is their choice to leave that lamp behind, or even to blow it out. They bear full responsibility for that. It is their act of will to do it. So, God has given us the light. We can find our own way out. But we have to maintain that flame. We have to choose to maintain it. It is up to us. And there's no such thing as allowing it to go out unwillingly. Whenever it goes out as an act of our own will.